Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Prosperity Through Multifamily Real Estate Investing podcast. As always, I'm your host, Real Estate Cody, and joining me, as always, is our coffee connoisseur, Mr. Brian Alfaro. Brian, what's up, buddy?
I see what you're doing there, Cody. Testing a new one out. You're still looking, aren't you?
I'm still looking, man. I'm still looking. I
I
don't
kind
know.
of I kind of like that one though. So I don't know. Maybe it'll stick.
Is there? Okay, so we just got to figure out the hashtag to go with it. I don't know.
Yeah,
We'll come
no,
up with something clever. But
we'll
how
figure
you
it out.
doing?
I'm going good, man. Just trying to stay dry. It's been a little wet here in Houston, but it's summertime, so it's keeping the temperatures down. So not much to complain about, to be honest.
I know, man. I feel like it's just monsoon, never-ending monsoon. I feel like we need to take paddle boats everywhere we go, just because it won't stop raining. But it comes with the territory, I guess.
That's right.
But Brian, I'm excited, man. For the first time in probably a very long time, I think it was episode number 4, where
Oh
we
wow.
introduce our good friend Mr. John Beatty as a co-host. That we've done an episode where it's just us versus having a special guest on, and so I'm excited, man. This is going to be good stuff, and I'm excited to talk about this topic because I know that you and I both share a passion for investor relations, building or raising capital, excuse me. And so today, I figured we talk about the 6-step framework to raising over $1 million on your first capital raise. What do you think?
No, I love it. I think that's going to be a huge value add to our listeners, and I think it's going to be great for just you and I to kind of go through it and actually keep the conversation going, and hopefully add value to everybody's listening. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, man. Likewise, and perfect timing too. Obviously, we just wrapped up our most recent raise on our most recent deal that we participated in a couple of weeks ago,
Hmm.
and it was really great experience. Had a lot of fun. I think going through that experience, we learned a lot. Talked with a lot of great people, and what's your thoughts? I mean, as syndicators, we have so many responsibilities that we're responsible for, right? We have so many job and tasks that we have to do, and each of them require a certain skill set. And in my opinion, capital raising is arguably one of the most, if not the most important skill set you have to have if you're going to scale this business. What do you think?
I am going to have to agree, especially where we're at in the market cycle, right? So there's a lot of new investors looking to get into multifamily or just real estate in general, and finding deals is hard, right? So that's definitely an important skill set, but there are guys out there that are finding deals. These are guys that have, and gals that have substantial relationships and no brokers, and have been building off market relationships for many, many years and weeks or months or whatever. And they are going to need somebody to come in and step in and help close these deals very often. So being able to get your foot in the door in real estate by attracting capital, bringing money to the table, bringing equity to the table is a very, important thing for a lot of new syndicators to consider, because as we're aware of, it's very competitive out there, and you're going to be one of 20, 30 offers. And even if you're going off market, you're going to realize that a lot of sellers are very aware of what's going on in the market cycle and how expensive it is and how you can get top dollar. So, you know, going out there and trying to figure out how to bring a deal to another operator, especially if you're inexperienced, that's very possible, but definitely tricky. But attracting capital is something that a lot of people can do, and can go to other operators who have deals and really show them, like, look, here's my value add, right? We always talk about what's your value add, and your value add in those situations isn't necessarily bringing the deal to the table or the asset management, especially if you're newer and you've never managed an asset before. It's the ability to attract capital. So where we're at in the market cycle, and I think that's a very, very important skill set for anybody to have. But if you're just getting started, I think it's an area where a lot of new people should really take a good hard look at and figure out if that's something that it can bring to the table.
Yeah, so I would 100% agree with you, Brian. And I want to talk about the topic of what the phrase you mentioned of attracting capital versus raising capital, right? And because I think innately, when people enter into the space and they talk about syndication and they talk about raising capital, you hear this so often where you start with your close network, right? Your friends and your family, those may have capital to invest. And so often people are like, oh yeah, I've got these, three, 400, $500,000 in soft commits and from people that they know. And then when it comes time to actually put an opportunity or an offering in front of somebody, and they realize very quickly, either timing, circumstances, maybe they didn't have the liquidity that they needed, whatever the case may be. Ultimately, a lot of people fall short of hitting that target, right, on their first raise. And so, when we talk about raising capital, I think we both are big followers of Hunter Thompson, right? And I think he was the one that coined this phrase of attracting capital. How do you draw capital to you to where you have an unlimited supply of private capital that want to invest with you and whatnot? And I think as you build out your business and your brand, when you reach that level of being able to attract capital, you're going to take your business to a whole nother level, right? I mean, it's just completely different than having to go around chasing investors, so to speak. And it's a very comforting feeling when people are reaching out to you and people are drawn to you and what you're doing versus the vice versa. What do you think?
I agree 100%. That the phrase attracting capital, I mean, it leads us into our 6-step framework, right? Like, so how do you even do that? How do you attract capital versus raising capital? And how do you have that mindset shift as well, right? To realize that as the operator, you have something that people are really looking for. They're looking for an investment opportunity, a quality investment opportunity at that. So you shouldn't feel like you just said chasing people around, right? When you have an opportunity, you shouldn't feel like you're chasing your investors around for their, 50, 75, 100,000, right? If you're in that situation, that's not a good situation to be in, because you probably haven't done a very good job, not only nurturing your database, but really bringing it to our first step in the framework. And that's building your brand, right? So branding is very, very, very important in this business. And it's really hard. I believe it's Dan Hanford, who was on our podcast, who said this recently. He says people have to know, like, and trust you. And he likes to ask people, what's the most important one, right? And everybody says it's like and trust, because nobody wants to give their money to somebody they don't like and trust. But his argument is that they have to know you, right? They can't like you and they can't trust you if they don't know you. Mm-hmm. So that goes perfectly hand in hand with our first point. Is you have to work. If you're going to attract capital, raise capital, whatever phrase you want to use, you have to have a strong brand. You have to be building a brand. And that takes time. This is one of those things where, you can go and you can create a name, you can create your LLC, you can create a logo, you can go through all these other steps we're going to talk about here shortly, but it's definitely not one of those things where you can just pop on the radar, start throwing your brand out there and people are going to be okay with it. There's a lot of little things that go in with that. So building your brand really is one of the biggest keys, I think, to being able to attract capital, so that when somebody sees your logo, somebody sees your brand, the first thing that pops in their head is good things. You want them to be thinking good things about your brand, about your opportunities, about your investment strategy, and all the other little things that come down to it. Because at the end of the day, yeah, this is X's and O's and dollars, but there's emotion involved here, whether people realize it or not. They have to feel good about you, feel good about your brand, feel good about your business, and then ultimately feel good about the deal. But the deal is kind of the last part. So the branding part, I think it's one of those things that people shouldn't take for granted.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And this, I know we've talked about this internally, my experience with the first capital raise. And, the things that we're going to talk about today are all things that unfortunately I discovered the hard way on that first opportunity. And for those who may have not been familiar with that story, a highlight, or excuse me, a very brief summary. In 2019, I was a part of a partnership raising capital for a particular deal, and I raised $0 out of a very small soft commit that I had. And it was such a traumatizing experience in one respect, but it was the best experience I could have had, because it taught me so many things about, just how difficult it really is to do things like you mentioned, Brian, build your brand, telling people what it is that you're doing, and actually getting people to know, like, and trust you to where they want to invest with you. And so that's what I'm really excited about today. And I hope that the message that we share today will help some of the other ones, or some of our listeners, excuse me, pick up on some of these things and apply it to their business, so they can avoid some of the mistakes that I know I made, and really just take these principles and start out with this. And I think it'll help change their trajectory when it comes to building their business and raising capital. So you mentioned branding. Let's kind of list out the 6-step framework here, and we'll go back and chop each one of them down. How about that? So, sure. And again, these 6 steps, these are not the do all be all. I would feel, I feel like, but these are the things that I think that we believe we absolutely have to have in order for you to really start a a true business around raising capital. So let's list those 6 things. Number one, you just mentioned it, Brian. Great way to start: branding, right? You have to have a brand presence. Number two, you have to have a website, right? Number three, you have to absolutely have a newsletter. You have to be telling people what you're doing. Number four, you have to have a CRM or some type of way to capture your database, right? Number five, social media presence, which is, I know you and I are very big on, and is absolutely vital in today's time in the digital age. And then last one being thought leadership platforms, things like podcast meetups and blogs. And so that's our 6 step framework that we're going to attack today. And I want to go back and start with your first comment, or the first point you mentioned, Brian, about branding. Okay. And really, you kind of already started hinting around to some of the things around branding, but what do you think are the key components of really building that brand presence?
Oh man, there's so many components that go into building a brand presence. You can get real technical if you talk to somebody in marketing about, what is it, one word, is it two? What are your colors and all these different things? But I always tell people it's better to have something than to have nothing, right? So the progress over perfection. So I think before I was partnering with you and John, I remember going through the exercise in my head about creating my own brand and name and all that. And I probably spent like 8 hours staring at a sheet of paper and didn't get anywhere, which is, not a fun thing. But I think some of the key components with your branding is, you definitely want to make sure it has some sort of, message to people. Ideally, it doesn't necessarily have to, have a personal connection, but a lot of people are creating brands that are easy to understand as far as, the naming and different things like that. You can talk about the length of your brand. I think that's really important. Not getting too wordy with your brand. Some people have really long names and there's just different things like that you have to be considerate of when you're thinking about your URL and your LLC. And you also don't want to have brand confusion, right? There's a lot of other brands out there, syndicators, right? Real estate businesses that are using very similar terms. Investments and capitals are two very common words that are in a lot of these brands. But ultimately, you don't want to get so confused that if I type your brand in Google, 10 of them pop up or 5 of them pop up. You want to try to be somewhat unique, which can be a challenge, right? That's why it can take you a few days, if not a few weeks, to really start to narrow down what you want your brand to be. But you definitely want something that's going to be able to, go on a shirt very nicely, go on a website very nicely, represent just, your overall outlook and image and your mission and your vision and all that stuff that kind of comes along with just creating a company. But that's kind of my first thought process when it comes to starting a brand and, a logo and different things like that.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think for people that may be hearing this for the first time or maybe just newer into the space, as a real estate entrepreneur, there is a marketing component to this. You are, in a
We're
way,
essentially
essentially,
marketing. We're
you're
marketers.
essentially marketing. It's
Yeah,
exactly right, right? And so I look at your branding as it's your first impression.
absolutely.
How are people going to identify who you are, right? And it's your brand, right? For us, Blue Oak, people see Blue Oak Capital and they immediately know who Blue Oak Capital is. What is our philosophy? What are we doing, to impact the communities around us and all those good things. But I think the important things again is for people to understand that, you know, again, this is your first impression, so you have to do it right. I think to your point. And look, if there's anybody that's parents out there, it's kind of like naming your kid. It's harder than you think, right? Picking that name that's going to stick with you for forever. So I think the beautiful thing about our day and age is there's plenty of resources out there that if you're having trouble with, like you said, logo design, branding,
Oh
name,
yeah.
whatever it is, plenty of people out there that you can contract out to do that work for you. So that way you're not spending all those days and hours trying to ponder on it. But I definitely think it's something that has to be thought out very intently on who your brand is, because everything you do after that is going to be based on that presence, right? That first impression, which is so important, right?
Absolutely. And some, if you're attracting capital or if you're doing deals in a very specific asset class, a lot of times your brand can be a representation of that, right? So if you're, for example, partnering and raising capital with medical professionals, maybe your brand has some sort of spin on medical professionals, right? Or if you're focused on mobile home parks and that's your strategy, maybe it's not just, you know, a name investments or a name capital. Maybe it has something to do with mobile home parks in the name. So there's all those different things to kind of think through when you're thinking about your name and your strategy and who your overall investing avatar is for attracting capital, if you're assuming you're syndicating or even if you're doing JV deals. But there's a lot of variables to consider, which is why it can be time consuming. But I agree with you, Cody. You should definitely take your time and do your best to make the right decision. And there's probably no perfect, you can always go back and tweak things, logos, and, potentially even names down the road. But if you can get it right the first time, it definitely makes it easier.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I love that phrase that you mentioned earlier, progress over perfection. And that's so key. The most important thing is just getting something out there, and then you can tweak along the way, like you just said.
That's
Absolutely.
right.
But doing it right, this is an area that you definitely don't want to cut too many corners on. You definitely want to have a good visible brand that people resonate very well with, because it makes a difference of building relationships and people getting to know, like, and trust you. Right. So
That's right.
leads us into our second most important point that we feel like you have to have is a website, right? And, everybody in today's time has some type of website. It is, I think I've heard you say this before in the past, it is essentially, in a way, kind of like your business card of today's time, right? And especially in the commercial real estate space, when people are trying to vet you and understand who you are, one of the first places they go to look for is online. Do
Sure.
you have an online presence? And so I think this is a perfect piggyback off of our first point of branding, is having that good visible presence online that people can go and really get to know who you are as a brand.
I agree. Your website it's so important, and I don't think it can be understated how important it is to have a website. It doesn't matter which side of the business you're on. If you're attracting capital, you definitely need a website, because I don't know about you, Cody. I'm not giving somebody 50 or 75 or $100,000 that won't invest a few $100s or a few $1,000 in a quality website. If I can't type you in and look you up and go to your website, it's really hard for me personally, and some people are okay with it, to want to give you my hard-earned capital. And on the other side too, if you're in acquisitions and you're trying to actually find deals, you're meeting these brokers for the first time, and brokers have a very limited time. They don't have a lot of time to be doing all these other things, going out to lunch with you and stuff like that. Ideally, they're just very busy right now. So a lot of times you went on that introductory call or an introductory email, or even if it's in person, they're going to do a real quick search for you. You're going to go to your website and just kind of see, like, okay, how legit do these guys look? Do they have a portfolio? Who's in their mentorship team? Who's kind of helping them throughout the process? And if you don't have that website, it's not impossible, because nothing's impossible. People have done it, I'm sure, but it's already an uphill battle, and you're just you're putting some ankle weights on yourself as you climb that hill. So I think having that website, and it doesn't, again, I'll stick with that term, especially if we have a lot of newer investors, it's progress over perfection. You don't have to have a perfect website, to launch it. It's better to have something than to have nothing, but you definitely want to do your best to invest in your website. And if you're not a website guy, you need to hire somebody who is. And, that's another one of those areas where you definitely don't want to skim, because you'll get what you pay for at the end of the day. If you try to, if you or I were try to build a website, Cody, maybe it'll come out okay, but I would rather put that on somebody who does that all day for a living. I think it's worth every penny. So the website is definitely something that can't be understated.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct, man. Listen, you have to think about you as a business, right? Your presence as a business, because that's what we are as real estate investors in this space. Is we are small business owners, right? And so how many times you can think about something simple, right? Where you go online, you do a Google search for, maybe a business, coffee shop, for example, and you go look at a coffee shop online, and if they don't have a website, or they have a pretty crappy website, chances are you're probably going to look elsewhere, right? You're going to continue to go down the list to see, okay, who has that good visible presence. So when I know I go to Blockhouse's website, I see a beautiful, nice branded page. I know exactly, the business model there, what services you offer. And so, it draws you in and brings you in. And once it lures you in to go try the product, right? To try the service. And so essentially that's what you're doing with your website. You're getting people to understand who you are before even connecting with you, right? And again, in our space as real estate investors, we want people to know what is our investing strategy, what is our investing thesis, who are we working with, and as you mentioned, professionals in the space, brokers, like you said, for example, that's one of the first places they do go and look. And if they don't see you online, chances are you're not going to get a phone call back. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I agree with that. And I think to your point, this is coming from somebody who started doing a website on my own just to start. All I know is I needed something up there in the beginning, right? And I did simple service like GoDaddy.com, a couple $100, you could throw up a website and make it look halfway decent. But to your point, I think as you continue to grow your brand and you build your business, it's very, very important that you do get a nice professional website up so people can go to, because as you alluded to, people could see how much you spend when they go to your website.
Yep.
And if you're not willing to drop the right amount of money to give yourself a good brand presence, professional presence, then that could be an indicator of, who you are as an investor. So just watch out for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, what's a website? You can probably do a decent one for 500 to $1,000, give or take, something that's going to get you off the ground and get you pretty happy. So if you're trying to raise $1 million and you're not willing to spend $1,000, you're probably not in the right business, right? And you're gonna have a really hard time raising that capital. So, and there's so many back end things. I don't want to get technical because I know we got 4 more to go through, but a website is a very powerful tool besides just branding, which was our first point. We're talking about everything from SEO to, putting, having cookies and pixels on your website to sort of figure out where your people are coming from, using Google Analytics to, people finding you organically. Are you running paid ads? Are you doing, strategic SEO? Or we can go down a whole nother rabbit hole. But if you don't have that website, you can't even begin to grow your business and scale over time to start to take advantage of those things on your website. So you definitely got to start there, get something. It's better than nothing, and just kind of grow over time. It's another one of those things that just takes time.
Yeah, and it goes right in line with the thought process of attracting capital, right? When you have a great website that's incorporating a lot of those components in there about outreach and Google searches and SEO, all that good stuff, it draws people to you. That's how you start attracting people to your business. And that's what you really want. That's the ideal scenario. So, all right, man. So that's perfect. So next place, so we have the brand, we have a website. Now we have to start telling people what we're doing, right? We have to show people what we're doing. And one of the easiest ways to do that is through a newsletter. Very, very simple way to just be very formal in how you're communicating with people that you're interacting with. And I know we spent a lot of time putting our newsletter together, right? And it's evolved over the past 2 years. Kind of very similar to what you mentioned, right? It started somewhere, it wasn't perfect, but we found bits and pieces and we just put it together. But it's when people open a newsletter and they read your newsletter, they should be able to see what's going on in your business, what's going on in your life right now, and get people excited about what it is that you're doing, right?
That's right. So every one of these tools that we're talking about, these steps, they all have a purpose. And I think that's what people need to realize. And you have to ask yourself, okay, well, what's the purpose of a newsletter? And my response is top of mind awareness. If you're not staying top of mind in your investors and other people in your database as well, we'll talk about CRMs here in a second, but brokers, property managers, just different vendors to see that you're pushing out consistent quality content. And it doesn't mean you have to be an expert or label yourself as an expert. If you're not, it's not about, smoke and mirrors there, but being able to commit to pushing something out that's informational and keeping yourself top of mind and just being transparent throughout the process, right? So very recently, this is a fresh thing on my head because I've helped a few of our people in our network get their newsletter off the ground, and it's just about putting some content out there. Who are you? What are you trying to do? What are you doing currently? And then as you kind of progress, dropping information in there. What are you seeing in the market cycle? What type of expectations are you placing out there? Have you been walking any properties? Are you looking for more investors and for what type of deals? So staying top of mind is key because you can't if I meet you today and we have a great call, let's say we're just great energy, you're trying to invest in one of my deals and I feel great, you feel great. And then I disappear for 6 months and then I come back And I'm like, hey, Cody, remember me? We talked 6 months ago. I've got this great deal. It's 10% cash on cash, 20% IRR, whatever. It's a 50K minimum. You ready? And you're like, who are you again? So, if you're not staying top of mind, and there's a lot of ways to do that, but the newsletter is definitely one of those things. And here's the thing: sometimes that people don't even read them all, but that's okay. It's just seeing it hit their inbox, even if they just kind of skim through it, and just being top of mind, staying top of mind, and showing them that you're making progress in the industry. That's really the power of the newsletter, in my opinion. So that's my thought process on it. And I know you've had some experience personally. I was very fortunate to get to kind of come in and sort of, I guess, improve the newsletter. I know John focuses on the newsletter, but we've been able to curate more content, which I'm sure helps him. But when you started off your newsletter, Cody, give the listeners some insight. Was it perfect? Was it beautiful? Did it have all the industry expert knowledge, or were you just kind of just trying to get something off the ground?
It was hideous. It was absolutely hideous, man. But what it was is, like you just alluded to, it was me telling the world, what am I doing from a month to month basis? Exactly what you mentioned. Hey, I've looked at this many deals this month. These are my goals for this year, right? These are my goals for this month. Hey, here's some great articles that could be beneficial for you as a fellow investor in this space. They were helpful for me. And so sharing education through the newsletter. And so, to your point, it definitely wasn't perfect. And it's definitely not near the caliber that our newsletter is now. But again, it was just about telling people what we're doing, that top of mind presence, as you alluded to. And it's so important because so often that is and you said it perfectly. It's a very common mistake people make and not engaging the people that they're interacting with, not building those relationships over time. And you can't disappear for 6 months, a year at a time, and then circle back with something. That's not a relationship. And when we talk about relationship building, after we go through all these steps, we'll highlight this again, but there's multiple touch points that you can have with the people that you're building relationships with, so they can really get to know you. And that goes through that Dan Hanford model, right? The know, like, and trust. So the branding is in the website. That's the know part, right? Who are you? And then we start getting into, how do people start to like you and formulate an opinion on you? Right. A newsletter is a perfect way to do that. You tell people what you're doing, you show them what you're doing, you produce content through your newsletter that people can find valuable and utilize themselves. And so it's absolutely instrumental that you have it. And look, there's no perfect formula. It doesn't have to be a weekly newsletter. It doesn't have to necessarily be a monthly newsletter. Some people do quarterly. Some people do. The most important thing, I think, just being consistent, as you mentioned, right? Just showing up consistently on time, every time. And that way people can, they're not going to forget about you.
That's right. I agree. Staying top of mind. Don't let them forget about you. Do the best you can, whether it's monthly, quarterly, whatever kind of fits your schedule when you feel like you've got it there. Don't overthink it. I just tell people, we hear that all the time, right? Especially when it comes to social media and different things. They're like, well, what do I post? What do I write about? People don't care what I'm writing about. And I'm like, just put something out there. And it's not about being an expert or trying to go and, write a book or something like that and feel like that's what your newsletter has to be about. Share articles, like you said, other industry leaders and professionals, other YouTube videos, other podcasts you've been listening to, all those different things. It's just a valuable resource for somebody else who maybe doesn't have the time to go and find those things. So don't overthink it. Even if it's just short and sweet and it's just like something they can skim through in 60 seconds, it's okay.
Yeah. And one thing I think that worked out really well for us, right, is and I would argue that this is probably translated across our business as a whole, is we didn't recreate the wheel. Mm-hmm. Right. We just really found what others were doing that we really liked and said, hey, how do we mimic that? How do we mold that into our own, but not have to build it from scratch? Right. And so the newsletter is a perfect example. I think that we went through like 10 or 12 different newsletters that we were all subscribed to. And we were like, oh, hey, this looks cool. Let's add that. Oh, hey, look, this is cool. And we started piecing it together to formulate our own. And now that we have our own, we obviously share that with others as well. But I think the point is, just success leaves clues, right? So get on subscription lists for newsletters as you're networking with other people, see what they're doing, what resonates with you, and start building your own model that way. Don't let it hold you up. Don't wait 6 months to put this out there. Mm-hmm. Like you said, start it, get it started, tweak as you go. But again, just take bits and pieces from other people's that work well, that resonate with you, and then model what they're doing so you can build your own. I think that's a great way to get started.
I agree. I know I do that myself for different, not necessarily newsletter, but other things, right? Like find 10 other operators or 5 other operators and just sign up for all their newsletters, even if you have zero intention of investing, just to see what they're putting out there. Because
Yeah.
each one of them is probably going to have at least one thing on their newsletter, if not more, that you would love to have on yours. And, this is called a copycat league, whatever you want to call it, influence, nobody's reinventing the wheel out here and doing anything new. We're just all influencing each other and what we're doing. So just go out there and find what best represents your brand, which is the first thing we talked about. How do you drive people back to your website? That's what you can use the newsletter for as well. Staying top of mind, driving them back to your website if you got stuff on there as you grow your content over time. But just put something out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's important for us to, as we're going to move on to our next item on the list here, but none of these steps I think have to happen in sequential order. I think actually I would argue that they all should happen simultaneously. But I would argue that these first 3 points that we mentioned, the branding, website, newsletter, are probably things that you really want to have in place if you really want to show the database that you're going to be networking with that, you have good systems and you have good processes. Yeah. So, I lost my train of thought. What did I say?
Talking about newsletter and
yeah, simultaneously. So you want to work on these 3 things first. I feel like before you actually go and start really trying to tell the entire world what you're doing. And I only say that is because, again, your first impression is everything. And so having these things in place, or at least somewhat formulated in a way that people will be receptive, is I think going to be important. Because moving into our 4th step, in how do you collect all of these contact informations from people that you're networking with, right? How do you build out your database and keep contact with all of these people you're building relationships with? And one of the things that we found to be absolutely beneficial is through a CRM, right? Some people use Google Sheets or Excel sheets, whatever. There's other different platforms. I know we're very big on Active Campaign, but I think having some way that you can track your database, capture data, capture their contact information, and constantly engage with them through a CRM is an absolute must when you're talking about building relationships. What do you think?
Cody, I would 100% agree. I would argue, because I spend way too much time inside of our CRM, that this is maybe the most important tool, that once you're active and you're actually out there, you're looking for deals or you're looking for dollars. If you don't have a CRM, you're going to have a really big problem, because ultimately you're going to talk to a lot of people. You're going to be on Zoom, you're going to be on the phone, you're going to be meeting people in person at conferences. And I don't care how smart you or how good of a memory you think you have, you're not going to remember everybody you talk to. I know I don't. And having the CRM and keeping them in your database and taking notes on the call, where you met them, all these different, touch points you have with them, and seeing how they're engaging with your content, it's such a valuable tool to stay organized, which is really what a lot of these tools are about, right? We keep emphasizing being professional and getting a business off the ground. And you can't have a business if you're not going to stay organized. So the CRM and, any type of other tools you use to stay in contact with your potential investors or your other potential partners, whether you use an Active Campaign, like you said, a lot of people like to use MailChimp. Those are 2 email automation softwares that have some built-in CRM capabilities. There's other ones out there as well that are more focused on just the customer side, whether you're using Salesforce or Podio, or there's so many different tools out there. And honestly, they're all probably good in some shape or fashion. So don't get analysis paralysis picking one as well. I know we favor Active Campaign. It doesn't mean it's the best. It's just the one that works well for our business. But get something, put it together. Most of these things have some sort of free trial, or you can use it on a free basis on a more limited capacity. But even Active Campaign and some of these other ones can be very affordable, $10, $20 a month. And, you don't need all the bells and whistles when you're just getting started. You just need somewhere to connect your contacts. I meet you at a conference. I put your first and last name in the CRM with your email and your phone number, some notes on where I met you and what we talked about. And now when I re-engage with you, Cody, I can go back and look, and it's a different type of conversation versus me going, oh man, where did I meet this guy? I don't remember when the last time I talked to him. I can pull up my notes and say, oh, it's Cody. We met in October 2020. We met at the so-and-so conference. We spent 30 minutes talking about this. He's looking in this market for these types of deals. Now I can say, hey, Cody, how's so-and-so going in that market? Were you able to find deals that were in the 30 to 50 unit range? How's everything going with your daughter? Because we talked about that, right? So it's more about that relationship building thing. So staying organized, utilizing those tools is so key in this business, because we say this all the time. This is a relationship driven business. And if you're not building those relationships and using those little tools, those little nuggets to sort of engage with people and stay connected, it just gets much more challenging.
Sure. And I think, to your point, it's about efficiency, right? It's about organization, like you said, tracking, being able to track the information, but it's about efficiency. And as you go along in your business and you start building a scalable business, and you start multiplying, in this case, your investor database, right? You're going to be having so many different conversations and so many different networking events that you're going to be attending, and so many pieces of content that you want to probably communicate to your database. And so that's a lot of work, especially if you're having to do it manually. So the advantage of having a CRM, in addition to being organized, is being able to be efficient. And right. And you mentioned some of these platforms have email automation, being able to create certain campaigns that are automatically distributed to your database and put on autopilot. That way you're not having to spend all that work. And I will guarantee you, if you're trying to do it manually, it's going to be disorganized. It's going to be time consuming, labor intensive, yep. And you're going to forget. I mean, come on, how many times you get caught up doing other things in life and business, and you're like, oh crap, I forgot to send out the newsletter this week or whatever, right? It happens to all of us. So I think these are great tools for you to be more efficient in your business well, so you're not spending the time manually communicating with all of these different people in your database. So very important. And going back to your example, like you said, if you fall off the face of the planet, you and I don't talk for 6 months, if we're in a new relationship, it's important to have those notes to fall back on and go back and identify what that last conversation was like, so you could pick up right where you left off. Right.
That's right. I think
you shouldn't be waiting 6 months to talk to people, but
that's right. You definitely shouldn't. And the software can remind you to call somebody, right? Or remind you to email someone, which is, another conversation. But the goal is to connect the dots. We're talking about these 6 steps, and ultimately you want to connect the dots. And I would argue that the CRM is sort of the glue that holds everything together, right? Because you have a brand, which is great. You have a website, awesome. You have a newsletter. And it's like, okay, well, how does all this sort of get pieced together? And to me, it's the CRM, because you got to think through the customer journey, essentially, the investor journey. They see your brand. Oh, that's cool. These guys are syndicating. They're doing deals. I'm looking for a place to put capital. I'm looking for a JV partner, whatever their thought process is. They go to your website. There's a link there. It says sign up for the newsletter or sign up for updates from Blue Oak Capital, right? They put their email address in there. What happens when they hit that submit button? It should be connected to your CRM. And now you got their first name and the last name, their email, and the CRM can then send them the newsletter. Goes back to the point we just talked about, right? And now they're saying, okay, these guys got a brand, they got a website. I dropped my information, then I automatically got a newsletter. And then there's other content coming to me, but it really comes down to the CRM doing all that work for you, so that you and I aren't sitting there staring at the website, hitting the refresh button, hoping somebody drops their email in, so we can put that stuff in manually. So CRM is super important. And you mentioned scale earlier, and I think that's so important, because eventually you're going to have 200, 500, 1,000, 2,000, hopefully 5,000, 10,000 people in your CRM. It's impossible to do that on your own. And if you're going to delegate at all and put systems in place, whether it's you or a virtual assistant or somebody you hire down the road, you're going to definitely want to be able to leverage the resources of staying organized with the CRM.
Yeah, 100% agree, man. Very well said. And I don't disagree with your point. I think it is definitely the glue that holds all these other pieces together, and it's definitely top on the priority list. But I think moving into our last 2 points here, I think for me are probably arguably the most important in this process, because when we talk about attracting capital, it's about numbers, right? It's about um, casting as wide of a net as you can, right? Because if you only have 10 people in your database and you're trying to go raise, $1 million or tens of millions of dollars, you're going to need more than that, because the conversion rates when you talk about raising capital are, if you put it on a scale, are very, very low, right?
Mhm.
And so going back to this about marketing, right, and lead generation, those type of things, it's all about your conversion rates. And so you really want to have as wide of a database or as big of a database as you can if you're going out there and raising millions of dollars capital. So that way, even a 1 or 2, 3% conversion rate on, let's say, 5,000 people in your database, that's going to equate to a very high number of
Sure.
potential investors versus just the 10. So leads me into my next point. You have to have a social media presence in today's time. You absolutely have to. It's absolutely vital. And I think looking back on COVID, if we look back on our business, we were predominantly doing mostly in-person live networking, handshaking, meeting people at live events. But there's only so much time that you could do for that. And then COVID hits, and then everybody's quarantined. Everybody's stuck behind their computer, they're stuck at home. And if you didn't have a digital presence, you were screwed. Let's
Yeah,
be honest, right? I mean,
for sure.
and if you go back and look at our business, I mean, we did so much networking last year throughout COVID with more convenience because we could sit at our desk versus traveling an hour, 2, 4 hours, maybe jumping on a plane somewhere. Now all of a sudden you could accelerate the amount of network you were doing because you could do it from your computer. And that was thanks to things like social media. So let's dive into that a little bit because I know that's something that you and I are both very, very big on.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a very important topic. And it's another thing we hear very often just from, we're not, again, not that we're experts or anything, but sometimes when you meet somebody who's just getting started and they're not used to either posting at all, period, they don't do social media, or if they have an account, maybe they don't post very much content. You start hearing the question about, oh, well, I'm getting into real estate. What do I post, right? What do I say? What do I do? How do I not seem like I'm, you know, trying to be something more than I am, looking fake? And at the end of the day, it goes back to that quote again. It's like, it's progress over perfection. And really with social media, people have to know what you're doing. Otherwise you're not gonna be able to attract that capital, and you're not gonna be able to attract those deals and those partners as well. So I would agree with you that, we spent most of 2020, once we got locked down, really emphasizing and focusing on our digital platforms, our CRM, our website, our branding, and then also putting a social media strategy together so that the world knew, or at least our circle of influence knew, what Blue Oak Capital was doing, what we're trying to do. And it really goes back to the other thing that I pointed out in the newsletter, and that's what social media is about. It's two things in my opinion. One is staying top of mind, because it's very common that you and I have a call with somebody, whether it's another operator looking to be partners with us, or somebody looking to place their capital, a passive investor. And what happens when you get off the call, or if a day or two later, you get a LinkedIn request, or you get a Facebook friend request, right? Or somebody starts following you on Instagram. So people want to see and know what you're doing. Are these guys legit? What type of content are they pushing out? And do I just personally align with their investing thesis? Maybe you like them, maybe they like us, but they don't like Houston for some reason, and they don't want to do deals in Houston, right? And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But if they're not following you and engaging in your content, and you're not putting the content out there, ultimately, you're not going to have that top of mind awareness. And then the second thing, besides the top of mind awareness, is getting new followers, right? Because when you start to leverage social media the proper way, really, it's like you said, it's a numbers game, right? You're going to have your circle, people that have added you, have engaged with you, but you're also going to run into a lot more new people that you maybe never would have gotten, any type of introduction to prior to being on social media, right? So I know in our last opportunity that we were able to successfully fund, over half of the investors, over half, at least 60%, they're not here in Houston, and they're people that we engaged with on social media. They were either at our virtual meetup, they were following us on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever. So the social media tool is such a powerful platform for attracting capital, letting the world know what you're doing, and ultimately finding partners. Because when people see you're closing deals, they're like, oh, those guys are doing deals, let's give them a call and see what they can do for us.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, like you said, it's an extension of your branding, right? It's an extension of telling the world what it is you're doing. And I mean, if you think about like, I don't know how many hundreds, almost thousands of people we talked to last year. I mean, just a ton of people we talked to last year that, like you said, otherwise we probably would have never met. These are people that aren't local to our area. They're not local to our region, even people that we normally probably would have never come past by without social media, and listen, for those who may be listening and like, oh, I don't do social media, or oh, it's not for me, or listen, it's not as overwhelming as it feels as you think. 2 years ago, I made one post a year on social media, and it was like, hey, thanks for the birthday wishes, or happy anniversary to my wife, or something like
Sure.
that. My wife had to actually create some events for me or something like that, when I first started. But the point is, listen, you don't have to be an expert at it, nor do you have to be an influencer. It's not the point. The point is just engaging with people, right? Connecting with people that otherwise you normally wouldn't be able to connect to. And you only have so much time in the day. You only have so many resources in the day. I mean, you can't have a phone call or a meeting at a coffee shop or lunch with everybody you come in contact with. There's just no way. We just don't have that type of time. And so I think utilizing things like social media are a great way to engage with people, interact with people, share your message and your brand, but also just really build relationships with other people that you may be interested in working with, right?
Sure.
And whatnot. And so I think it's important. You absolutely have to have a digital presence today. And if you don't, I mean, you're really just, unfortunately, you're just non-existent.
Yeah, I mean, there's a cheesy saying, your network is your net worth, right? And whether you believe it or not, it's a thing I definitely believe in, and growing and strengthening your network both in person and online. I think it's just so crucial to being successful in this business, especially if you're getting started and following a framework that we've been talking about this whole time. And that's attracting capital, and then trying to find other partners who either have deals or trying to get into your own deals yourself. You really want to be as present as possible on social media. It doesn't mean you have to post every day, multiple times a day, even if you're posting once a week, right? Twice a week, whatever you're comfortable with. I was in the same boat as you, Cody. Prior to 2019, very late 2019, I didn't have any social media. And that was a choice that I made for a variety of reasons. I was really focusing on my family, my career, and I didn't necessarily feel like it was the best use of leverage for me at the time based on what I was doing. But once I got into real estate and was getting serious about it, I saw how other successful people had a social media presence. Almost everyone you knew. It's pretty rare that somebody you run into that's becoming successful or has already found the success isn't leveraging the power of social media. So again, comes back to a copycat league, monkey see, monkey do, and other people were doing it. So let's jump on, let's do what they're doing and try to do your best to post engaging quality content. And it goes back to a message, I think Marco in our social network from Make It Happen, Jake and Gina, like I've heard this plenty of times. People get so enamored or focused on how many likes did I get, how many comments did I get, who's looking at my stuff. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. And we learned that during our raise, right? You've got these people that never like your stuff. They never comment on your posts, but you're connected with them on LinkedIn or on Facebook, and they've been following you for 6 months. And
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden you get a call and they're like, hey, I think I'm ready to invest. Right. And, or you just met them and they're accredited and they're very sophisticated. They know good deal, bad deal. You don't need to explain it to them. And they see you post something about a deal you're doing. If you're doing a 506C and you can post it, right? They can very quickly analyze the deal, go, I like this. Here's my $50,000 or $75,000, right? So the power of leveraging that is just it can't be understated in how important it is, especially if you're just getting started.
Yeah, I mean, and look, we talked about this earlier, right? Being top of mind. When people see you engaging and see people see you on these different platforms, especially consistently, it's a
Mm-hmm.
great way to stay top of mind, like you
Yep.
said, because you're telling people what it is you're doing, you're interacting with people, you're building relationships through engagement, but it's just showing your presence, right? You're not just somebody who's showing up 1 month and they don't see you again for another year.
That's right.
It's being active. yeah, it's just another way just to again continue to stay top of mind. It's such an important thing. You don't want people to forget about you. You want people to remember you, especially in networking, whether it be social media, live networking, whatever it is. This is where the real magic happens, right? When you're engaging and you're building relationships with people, this is where opportunities unfold. Whether it's raising capital, finding partnerships, maybe even potentially deals, access to resources, either professional vendors or whatever the case may be that you don't have already. Um, it's absolutely where the real magic happens in your business that you absolutely have to have is that networking. And like you said, man, social media, you have to have it. You have to have it. So
Yeah, how common is it that we meet somebody in person for the first time, or maybe we're at a networking event and the first comment they make is, "Hey, how's it going? Oh, I've been following you guys online. You guys are doing this, you guys are doing that. It's so awesome, right?" So people are watching, period, and being mindful of that, and trying to post quality over quantity. I think is super important. Not just throwing random stuff out there to just try to trick the algorithm to posting your stuff more. So I think it's just something for people to definitely keep in mind. And as you're sort of building your brand, your website, you talked about the newsletter, the social media is a great way to sort of, to use the cheesy term, like the 10Xer, right? How do you sort of throw gasoline on this fire? Like, what's your gasoline? And social media can be a great way to just build your brand, build your newsletter lists, add more people to your CRM so that ultimately you can attract more dollars and do more deals.
absolutely, absolutely, that's the name of the game. All right, Brian, let's get into our last point here. An absolutely critical point. And this is something that obviously we're very passionate about because we have many of these, but thought leadership platforms, absolutely critical component of your business, because this is where you start building trust in people that you're engaging with, right? Even though that you may not be talking with people every day, it's another touch point that people can refer to learn more about you, right? To build relationships with you. And so examples of thought leadership platforms, podcasts, meetups, whether it be live or virtual, blogs. What are some other examples you could think of different thought leadership platforms?
Ebooks, creating
Ebooks.
content, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot.
Right. And so the whole thought behind a thought leadership platform is to what? Provide value. And most commonly, one of the best ways to provide value is through education, right? And being resourceful, sharing information that could be applicable to somebody else's business so that they can apply it to their business and hopefully help them succeed. Right. And so that's the point of having thought leadership platforms. And listen, not everybody wants to do podcasting. Not everybody maybe want to be the host of meetups. It's a lot of work. And do you have to have all three or four or however many at once? Not necessarily, no. But it's important that you have something that people can just again get to refer to that shares more about who you are and what your investing thesis is, right? And I think the more that you have, the more successful you're going to be at building those relationships and that trust with people that are engaging with your content. Would you agree?
I would agree, definitely. The thought leadership is really where a lot of that, we talked about we talked about the trust really comes from the thought leadership platform, in my opinion, because if I'm a passive investor or if I'm an active investor looking for potential partners, I want to check out their thought leadership platform to see if they're educated first, because that's really important. You don't want to give your money, everybody works really hard for their money. You don't want to give your money to somebody who's not educated. In a thought leadership platform, whether you have a podcast or a meetup, or you're writing a blog, or you're creating some sort of content on YouTube, there's so many ways to look at thought leadership. It really allows me as a passive investor or as another active investor looking for a partner to see, do you and I have an alignment in our investing thesis, right? The things you're saying, not that anyone's right or wrong, but is there an alignment there? So it allows you to build that trust with that other person or that other group. So I think you made a great point when you said you don't have to have them all, because it is, we know from experience, it's very time consuming. Yeah, creating content and trying to repurpose it as well, and just making sure you're staying on top of all the things that kind of come along with it. But at the end of the day, it's such a valuable resource because it's very common for me personally that and talk to somebody and they have a question, and I'm able to reference our thought leadership content. I'm able to send them a blog that we wrote that specifically answers a particular question. I'm able to send them a podcast episode on a guest we interviewed that answered their question, right? Or I'm able to send them just our newsletter to get in our circle and start to see how we think. So there's so many valuable ways to build a relationship with people. And if you're able to provide them with all that quality content through your thought leadership platform, they're gonna trust you a little bit more, that you know what you're doing, because people know that this is very time consuming. This is not a business in a box. You can't go and drop 50K or whatever and just just do it. I'm sure there are people that have tried and maybe not have had success, but you have to really invest in all this stuff. So it helps with that trust building for sure. And I think it's a point that can't be underemphasized.
Yeah, one of my favorite questions that I get asked often is the podcast, for example, worth it? It's labor intensive. Obviously, it's time intensive, right? It takes time to get these processes set up to operate a podcast. And we get this so often, right? Is it really worth it? Everybody has a podcast.
Sure.
And I refer back to the example of our most recent raise, where we had two examples in which we had new investors that we were connecting with for the first time. This was a 506c raise, and so we were able to do that. But we were connecting with people, these in particular investors, and they had, as you mentioned, some questions regarding investing in syndications, investing in a passive private placement. And we were able to refer them to a couple of our podcast episodes, in addition to some of our blogs. And I think that was really the cementing factor in, hey, these guys are people that I can relate to and trust, because they're resourceful, right? They have content that not only is legitimate but impactful to me, but they know where to get the answers to my questions if I have them. And I think you can't undervalue that by any means. I mean, it's so important that you understand the importance of that. And both of those investors converted and ended up passively investing with us. And so I tell people, if you just get one investor out of any of those thought leadership platforms, it's absolutely worth it. You got an infinite return on that time and effort, because you've built that trust now. And hopefully, ideally, if we do things right, these are going to be people that are going to be investing with us long term and repetitively, right? But are these things important? 100% important. You absolutely have to have them.
I agree. Yeah. And the other point that I think people fail to think about when it comes to the podcast has to do with the other end of the spectrum, not just with the passive investors, but also engaging with people that are way ahead of us, right? We've had some phenomenal guests on this show, people that are just doing tremendous things in the real estate space and have been able to truly add value to our listeners. These are people that are very busy. They have big businesses with a lot of moving parts. And the fact that they're willing to commit their time to come on a show, we don't take that, for granted. We don't take that lightheartedly. But the fact of the matter is that there's a really high chance that if you and I were to cold call somebody with 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 units and just say, hey, can I just like talk to you for 15 minutes? Just want to pick your brain. Very common term, right? They don't have the time for that, right? They can't. It's not that they don't like you. It's nothing personal, but they can't just allow somebody to spend 15 minutes of their time like that, where they're not getting something in return. So our value add to them, what we're essentially giving back, is we're able to spread their message, right? So they feel better about spending 30, 45 minutes, an hour coming on our show, and it allows us to have conversations with people. I think I was mentioning that maybe we wouldn't be able to talk to, and we've been able to build some relationships and build some really strong relationships with different vendors and property managers and different things that have been on the show, that we know down the road the podcast was sort of the foot in the door, and now we're able to nurture those relationships and sort of leverage them over time. So I think the guest aspect as well is something that can't be forgotten about as your show begins to grow and people say, okay, these guys aren't just popping up every once in a while. They're 30, 40, 50 episodes in. I don't know, what would you say the number is when it started to build momentum, when there was more inbound requests than outbound requests? But it's definitely something to take in consideration. If you're looking to talk to really high caliber people that maybe wouldn't talk to you otherwise, podcast is a great way to do that.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree. And going back to that question, is it worth it? I mean, listen, the purpose behind a podcast doesn't matter if you're one of 1,000. the purpose behind a podcast or any thought leadership platform is to build relationships. That's the number one purpose, to build relationships through that education, through that resourcefulness, whatever the case may be. And I think it's important for you to know, like, you can't just have a very cool website. That's not enough, right? People can't just go, well, number one, unless you just have a jam up SEO or lead generation funnel that just gets a million people to your website every day. It's not enough for people to connect with you, right? Or build those opinions on who you are. So having thought leadership platforms is a great extension of that. And it's important to know too, that not everybody learns in the same manner or connects in the same manner. Hey, maybe a lot of people don't like podcasts, but they love reading the blog, or vice versa. Maybe people don't have time I don't have a lot of time to read like I used to, but boy, I'm in my car a lot, traveling in and out of Houston or wherever I'm going. I can listen to some podcasts all day long. And, same thing for meetups. And so we have both a virtual live meetup. It's another way for us to get out and meet people and draw people into what we're doing. Through being those platforms. So the point being is, I think the more touch points you have, the better, because you're going to appeal to more of a general audience and more people that you can build relationships with, which is so important. So
that's right. You used the term earlier, casting the net as wide as you can. And ultimately what you need is a lot of nets, right? If you have one net casting a very small niche, it's possible, but you're just going to take a lot more time to build momentum. So if you have a bunch of nets, right? The newsletter is a net, your social media is a net, your podcast is a net, your meetup is a net. These are all essential ways to just meet new people, to do more deals, either attract capital or find partners. And you just got to cast it as wide as you can, because you said this earlier as well. It's a numbers game. And if you turn over enough stones and knock on enough doors, you find that good things tend to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, man. And I think too, one last point that I'll make here is that to the point of those who are concerned with, well, everybody has a meetup, everybody has a podcast. Listen, this is not about competing with those who have podcasts or meetup. This is about building your brand. This is about building your relationships with the people that you're connecting with, and people getting to know who you are and whatnot. So, going back to our point about social media, forget about the likes, forget about the, what people think. It doesn't matter. You're not competing with other people. And if you're trying to, then you're doing it wrong. This is about building your presence, your value add, your business. This is about you and who you are to somebody else. And so don't ever let that be a barrier. So get out there, build your brand, and don't ever be afraid, because there's so many different thought leadership platforms out there. So
that's right. You can't compare yourself to others. Everybody has a different journey, right? Maybe they end up with the same results. How you get your first 500 units and how I get my first 500 units could be two totally different walks of life, right?
Yes.
But you can't be out there constantly comparing yourself to others, saying, "Oh man, that guy's doing 5 deals a year, 6 deals a year. I'm not doing any deals, and maybe I should just quit." Right? Well, what you're seeing is what looks like on social media or on their newsletter or whatever. You're seeing what looks like overnight success. But here's the reality. These guys and gals out there doing 5, 6 deals a year, they've put in the time. They've put in the sweat. And there's a lot of sweat equity that they've built up doing the things that we're talking about: building a brand, building a website, having a newsletter, having a great CRM that funnels people in and that allows them to stay in contact with people, being on social media and having those thought leadership platforms. That's how they're doing 5, 6 deals a year. And they're leveraging the 6 steps we just followed. So if you're out there comparing yourself to others, and to go back to your point and saying like, oh, there's a million podcasts, I'm like the 5th meetup in town, it doesn't matter, right? Because everybody starts from somewhere and everybody gets to where they're trying to go in a different way. And if you're not out there at least getting started and you're making up excuses, then you're never even going to have the opportunity to do any type of deals in the future, because you're just telling yourself, you're quitting before you even get started, right? You're telling yourself you can't. And it goes back to, we're not talking about mindset in this episode, but it's just a mindset shift. You got to realize that no matter if I have 5 people at my meetup or there's 50 or 500, I'm going to keep doing it no matter what, because I know it's going to benefit me in the long run.
Yep, absolutely, man. 100%. And, we said it before, we'll say it again right here: success leaves clues. And all of the guys that have come before us that are out there, like you said, building these massive businesses, every one of them have these steps in place. And I know that we follow the same framework because we learned from them and we put it in our business, and it's done wonders for us. And so, I think this is, again, this is not the be all do all to go raise, millions of dollars, but I will tell you that these are the 6 steps that you absolutely have to have in your business if you're going to go do it, especially for your first capital raise. If you want to do it, you want to do it right, you have to have these 6 steps incorporated into your business. And Brian, you mentioned this perfectly a minute ago. It takes time. It does take time to build these. So it's important that you put them in place now and continue to build and continue to perfect them as you go. But most importantly, just get started, get it out there and get going. So,
Great.
Yeah. So this has been great. I know we've kind of been going on for probably right in an hour now. And I feel like each one of these points, we could probably spend a whole entire episode on by themselves.
Yep.
But, I hope that this resonates with somebody listening today that really is looking for opportunities to learn how they can go raise $1 million+ on their first capital raise. And you can't cut corners in this business. You can't do it cheap. You can't do it, on your own. And, again, trust me, these are the steps that you absolutely have to take to build that business. So go out there, crush it, implement these steps. If you need any help at all with doing any of the 6 steps that we mentioned, feel free to always reach out to us. We love helping others put this framework out there, and would love to share what's worked well for us. So, Brian, good conversation, man. Thanks for being on. This has been fun. We should do this more often. What do you think?
Yeah, Cody, absolute pleasure. Great idea. Hopefully we're able to add value to our listeners and help them, get into their first opportunity or just, grow their business. And I look forward to doing this again with you again soon.
Likewise, buddy. Likewise. Well, to all those tuned in today, thank you so much. We'll catch you on the next one.